Hi and welcome to munshigiri.com. In this tutorial, we'll talk about the Indian Contract Act 1872. In this part, we'll cover only the major definitions contained in Indian Contract Act, and rest of the act we'll be covering through other tutorials. So if you look at Indian Contract Act contains three words. First is Indian, second is contract, and third is act, which is followed by an year, that is 1872. Now if you look at any act, it has an year like 1872 in our case. What does it mean? Now this is the year in which an act comes into force. So we can make out that the Indian Contract Act came into force on 1st September 1872. Coming to Act. Now the question arises, how does an act come into effect? So we'll discuss about that. When a draft bill is passed by both the houses of parliament. You know the houses of parliament? The first is the Lok Sabha and then the Rajya Sabha. So, when a draft bill is passed by both the houses of parliament and gets the assent of the president, it becomes an act. So, draft bill passed by Lok Sabha plus passed by Rajya Sabha plus gets the assent of president, it becomes an act. Contracts means that this act is related to the contracts. So here we have again the three things: Indian, contract and act, which means this is a law relating to contracts and in India, and which came into force on 1st September 1872. Now if we look at Indian Contract Act, we'll be writing it Indian Contract Act as ICA. Indian Contract Act has 238 sections, out of which 1 to 75 sections cover the general principles of law of contract. It covers the general principles, and the other sections 124 to sections 238 covers the special contracts. Now, which are the special contracts? Special contracts are contracts such as contract of indemnity, guarantee, bailment, pledge, and agency. So till now we have covered that Indian Contract Act came into force on 1st September 1872, and this law is related to all the contracts in India. Now the next thing we'll cover is the extent of applicability. It says, okay, let it focus. Extent of applicability. Indian Contract Act 1872 is applicable to whole of India, except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now you must be wondering why a lot of acts do not apply to Jammu and Kashmir. The reason is, when Jammu and Kashmir merged with India, it was granted a special autonomous status. With this status, The central government was left with authority only in matters of central government was left with authority only in certain matters. And which were those matters? The first one was defense, then was external affairs, there was communication and finance, which was specified in the Institute of Accession. As a result, many laws functional in rest of the India do not extend to Jammu and Kashmir. Now, Jammu and Kashmir has its own separate acts for some of these acts, like J&K has, in respect of contracts, it has the Contract Act of Jammu and Kashmir. The Contract Act of Jammu and Kashmir, which came into force in 1977. So for the Partnership Act, the Jammu and Kashmir has the J&K State Partnership Act 1966 and the like. Okay, so coming to the definitions. Till now, 1st September 1872, the date of coming into force of Indian Contract Act extends to whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, we'll directly jump into the definitions. Okay, so first of all, we'll cover the definitions that we are going to cover in it. We'll be covering the definition of contract. We'll cover the definition of agreement. Okay, enforceability at law will not cover its definition, but I'm writing it over here just because a contract is an agreement which is enforceable at law. So we are making it like that. So when we look at agreement, it has two things. There must be an offer and the offer must be accepted. So when an offer is accepted and there is consideration in the contract, not in the contract, there is consideration, it becomes an agreement. So the various sections under which these terms are covered are: offer is covered under section 2 clause A, acceptance under section 2 clause B. 2 clause B of what? 2 clause B of Indian Contract Act 1872. Consideration under section 2 clause D, agreement under section 2 clause E, and enforceability at law has sections 9 and section 10, and contract has been defined under section 2 clause H of Indian Contract Act 1872. So we'll go this way. First of all, we'll talk about what offer means. So here we have offer. Offer generally means giving of services or taking the services of another person. Giving of services or taking the services. This is the general meaning of offer. Now let's cover the legal definition of offer as covered by section 2 clause A of Indian Contract Act 1872. It says, we'll talk about this first. Offer or proposal. Offer is also known as proposal. Offer is equal to proposal. These terms will be used interchangeably. Proposal, okay. So now we'll cover the legal definition of offer. It says, when one person signifies to another. And what does the person signify? His willingness. His what? His willingness to do or to abstain from doing anything. And why does that person do so? He does it with a view to obtain the assent of that other person. Either to such act or abstinence. He is said to make a proposal. Sorry, let's read the definition once again. It says, when one person signifies to another his willingness to do or to abstain from doing anything with a view to obtain the assent of that other person, either to such act or abstinence, he is said to make a proposal. Now we have come across a word here, abstain or abstinence. What does it mean? Abstinence means to refrain from doing something or to abstain from doing something. To abstain from doing something. Now we'll cover how does abstinence makes an offer from doing something. We'll look at an example to simplify this definition. For example, I offer to teach you for, let's say, rupees 1,000 a month. So what do you see hidden in the offer I have proposed? That is, I signify my willingness. My willingness to do what? My willingness to do something. Now what is that something? That something is teaching in my example. So next thing is, what is my purpose by making an offer of teaching here? It's simple. I want to obtain your assent as to whether you would like to study from me. Now the example that we just covered covers this part of definition, in order to obtain the assent of the other person, that is, with a view to obtain the assent of other person. Still we have one other part remaining, the definition that covers the abstinence. So we have already covered that abstinence is to abstain or to not to do a particular activity. Now you must have been wondering, how can this be an offer? Let me give you an example. For example, Mr. A, abstinence. For example, Mr. A offers Mr. B to not to sell a particular commodity. To not to sell a particular commodity. And Mr. A offers a price in return to B, so that he does not sell the commodity. Now this is an example of abstinence, and Mr. A has made this offer in order to obtain the assent to the abstinence. Now let's read this definition once again. Now here we have, when one person signifies to another his what? Willingness, we have covered that, to do or to abstain from doing something or anything with a view to obtain the assent of that other either to such act or abstinence, he is said to make a proposal. I hope this definition is clear to you now. Alright, moving ahead, we say that when I make you an offer of teaching, I'll be called as the offerer. Offerer or the proposer or the promiser. That means the person making the offer will be known as offerer or proposer or promiser under the Indian Contract Act 1872. Offerer or proposer or promiser. And when I make you an offer, that is the person to whom the offer is made, he is known as the offeree or proposee or promisee. So here we have the person to whom offer is made is offeree or proposee or promisee. So you see, here we had offerer, the offeree, proposer, the proposee, promiser and the promisee. So in our previous teaching, we talked that I am the offerer, proposer or promiser and you are the offeree, proposee or promisee. Now, till now we were only making an offer. Now when the offeree accepts the offer, he is called the acceptor or the promisee. Okay, so here on accepting the offer, the offeree will be called acceptor. Accepted. This is covered by Section 2, Clause C of Indian Contract Act 1872. For example, I'll give you an example. If I say, I offer to render you my services of coaching and I'm making an offer to you, that is, I am making a proposal to you. I am the offerer. Now, when you say, I agree to accept your offer, that is, I am ready to study from you, you will be called the acceptor or the promisee, since you have agreed to accept the offer made by me. Now, a term has emerged here, that is acceptance. Another term is acceptance. Now, what we'll do is, we'll cover acceptance here. Acceptance has been defined under Section 2 Clause B of Indian Contract Act 1872 that we have already covered. Okay, let it focus first. Alright, we have acceptance. Acceptance has been covered under Section 2 Clause B of Indian Contract Act 1872. It says, the legal definition says, when in response to an offer an offeree or any other person signifies his willingness to do or not to do a particular activity, he is said to have given acceptance. Let's read it once again. When in response to an offer, an offeree or any other person signifies his willingness to do or not to do a particular activity, he is said to have given his acceptance. For example, so when you, in response to the offer of my teaching, signify your willingness to do a particular activity, that is studying. You are said to have given your acceptance. This is all it is. Not to do or abstain from doing, we have already covered in the definition of offer. I hope that is clear to you. Moving on, we have is a proposal once accepted. A proposal once accepted becomes a promise. Becomes a what? Becomes a promise. So agreement, we had two things under the agreement. First was offer and the other was acceptance. So an agreement is an accepted proposal, offer or proposal. Okay. So what is an agreement? An agreement is a proposal which has been accepted, and when the proposal gets accepted, it becomes a promise. So till now we have covered two definitions. The first one was offer and the second one was acceptance. Coming to the third definition of the topic, we have is consideration. Consideration is covered under section 2 clause D of Indian Contract Act 1872. Let's see, what is consideration? Consideration. The reason for discussing consideration is that every agreement must be supported by consideration. So you remember when I drew the diagram, I'll show you over here. Yes. Okay. When I drew this diagram, I wrote agreement must have an offer and the offer must be accepted and it should be supported by consideration. This is what I'm talking about right now. Alright, coming back to point. Consideration in simple terms means that consideration is the price paid by one party for the promise of the other. It is the price paid by one party. This is the consideration. The technical meaning of consideration is quid pro quo. It is a Latin term which means something in return. Now that something in return can be money. Money plus money is worth. Money plus kind. And it should not only be equal to kind. Now what is money plus kind? This must be self-explanatory. Money plus kind is, let's say you are giving me 1,000 rupees for studying from me and free supply of some material. That is, you have some printing press and you are supplying my books free of cost. That is money plus kind. And what will be kind? Only the supplying of the material. Though the consideration cannot be only in kind, there has to be some amount of money involved. Now let's look at the legal definition of consideration as covered by the Indian Contract Act 1872. Right? So I've already told that consideration is covered under section 2 clause D of Indian Contract Act 1872. The definition says consideration is, it says 2 clause D of Indian Contract Act 1872, it says when at the desire of the promiser. When at the desire of the promiser, the promisee or any other person has done or abstained from doing something, or does or abstains from doing something. Or promises to do or abstain from doing something. Such act or abstinence. Such act or abstinence or promise is called consideration for the promise. For the promise. Let's read it once again. When at the desire of the promiser, the promisee or any other person has done or abstained from doing something, or does or abstains from doing something, or promises to do or promises to abstain from doing something, such act or abstinence or promise is called consideration for the promise. So interpreting the above definition is as follows. Promiser is the person making the offer. So we have promiser is the person making the offer, and the promisee is the person accepting the offer. Okay, that is, we also call him acceptor, the promisee or the acceptor. So when at the desire of the offerer, the acceptor has already paid the price, that is, has done or abstained from doing something, has already paid the price or pays the price, or abstains from paying the price, or promises to do or promises to abstain from doing in future, that is known as consideration. I hope that makes it clear. Moving on to the fourth definition that we have in hand is agreement. The fourth definition is agreement. Agreement is covered under section 2 clause E of Indian Contract Act 1872. Now what does agreement mean? This is the legal definition of agreement I am talking about. Agreement means every promise or every set of promise or every set of reciprocal promise forming a consideration for each other. Let's read the definition. Every promise or every set of promise or every set of reciprocal promise forming a consideration for each other. So basically we have come across certain terms here. First is the promise. Second is set of promise. Third is reciprocal promise. And the fourth is consideration. Let's discuss these one by one. First is the promise. A proposal or the offer, once accepted, becomes a promise. Set of promise, a number of promises together. Reciprocal promise. Now this is an interesting term, reciprocal promise. Reciprocal promises when an agreement is supported by another agreement. This is called reciprocal promise. So in reciprocal promise, each party gives a promise for a promise. For example, when you call Pizza Hut and ask for the delivery of pizza, the Pizza Hut promises to deliver you the pizza in 30 minutes. And in return, You promise to make the payment on delivery. For example, like that is a promise for another promise. Consideration we have already discussed, that is an agreement must be supported by consideration. Now let's learn some more important things about agreement. Now an agreement has to be a business or commercial transaction. Lawful agreement is an agreement which is not illegal or domestic or social or immoral. You must be already aware about these terms, but still let me go through these. Illegal means agreement which are not enforceable in the courts of law. For example, your smuggling or dealing in drugs, like smuggling or dealing in drugs. Domestic implies relationship between the family members. For example, the father and mother. The social agreements cover the agreements with the relatives. Okay, the immoral means against the basic rights of a person. The agreements which are against the basic rights of a person will be covered in the immoral. For example, you have bragging. So this is against the basic rights of a person. Coming back to the last definition in this tutorial, that is contract. This is the fifth definition we are covering here. The contract has been defined under section 2 clause H of Indian Contract Act 1872. It says an agreement enforceable at law is a contract. So we can make out from here every contract is agreement. However, every agreement is not contract. Do you agree with that? So every contract is an agreement, but every agreement is not contract. Why? Because agreement may or may not be enforceable at law. But when we talk about contract, it means it has the element of agreement plus the enforceability at law. Okay, so that is it. Let's do a quick recap of what we have learned today. Indian Contract Act came into force on 1st September 1872 and extends to whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Then we talked about certain definitions, starting with offer. Offer was section 2A, which was proposal by one party to another in order to obtain the assent of the other party. Then we covered acceptance, that was section 2 clause B, when the offeree signifies his willingness in response to the offer, that is acceptance. Third one was consideration, that we covered in section 2 clause D. An agreement must be supported by money or money's worth. Next we moved ahead to agreement, that is promise or set of promise forming consideration for each other. The last definition that we covered just now was contract, section 2 clause H. Agreement enforceable at law is a contract. So this is it for today. In the upcoming tutorial, we'll be talking about the essential elements of a valid contract, and we are going to do these in detail. So big thank you to you all and happy studying.